Hello, my name is Crystal, and this is my video book report for Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. This story takes place during the 20th century in Eatonville, Florida. What makes this location so important, especially during the 20th century, is because this is around the post-slavery, which means people are still impacted by slavery. However, this is like the aftermath, where society is still working its way towards the independence and community development of Black Americans and formerly enslaved people. Specifically to the character, this setting is important because as a Black woman, she is facing racial discrimination as well as gender discrimination, especially through her journey of looking for love. Janie is a stereotypical teenager, or she starts off as a stereotypical teenager, and she progresses through the story as the novel continues. Like, for instance, in the beginning of the story, she starts off as a teenager, confused and curious about love, and towards the end, she's able to understand what true love is. She's able to understand herself and her identity. Some traits that Janie has would be curiosity and ambitious. She's curious, which makes her, want to know more. And with her being ambitious, she's able to, go through with these curiosities. She's able to take on actions and, learn more about the things that she isn't fully understanding of. Janie's curiosity, in my opinion, is considered her inner thoughts. These definitely affect her outward actions. As she is curious and she wants to know, it's causing her to take on actions that would, lead her to an answer to where she would understand. From this point of view, the novel takes place in, I think, third person limited, where Janie is talking, where we can know Janie's thoughts and her opinions and depictions of other people in the novel. However, we're able to see the actions of others, just not their inner thoughts, only Janie's. I think this point of view is important because we're able to capture the actions of everybody through another party outside of the story, instead of just Janie's eyes and perspective, which would probably limit us to a lot of other stuff, considering society within the novel. In this novel, Janie has to experience human versus society that considers both racial discrimination and gender discrimination, or misogyny. In Janie's society, Black Americans and formerly enslaved people were developing and still building and starting to build their communities after slavery, after the Jim Crow laws. So this is where Janie is still experiencing racial discrimination, especially with her grandmother. Her grandmother has experienced slavery instead of just post-slavery, and so she has to deal with the trauma as well as what she was taught and how she was, taught to survive, which is security and protection. In terms of gender discrimination or gender inequality, Janie has to experience how women are always being oppressed by men, and how in the society there's a lot of standards for women where they're supposed to be doing, specific stuff that men are ordering them to do, which is misogyny. Near the end of the story, Janie is able to overcome these conflicts. She's able to understand what love truly is, how she thinks or believes that she's supposed to be treated as in terms of like a relationship, and she's able to be dependent on herself instead of relying on a partner or a man to satisfy her life. One theme in this story is what love truly is. In the novel, Janie is able to understand what love is near the end. However, through the story, she has to experience all of these obstacles. For instance, her first husband, she was married to him for security and protection, such as land, money, and limiting discrimination against from the society that she was in, as well as her second marriage, where there was oppression from her husband and also controlling. Like, her husband was really controlling to her, and it was not good for her. Another part about that theme is that love cannot be Love cannot be substituted with security. Love cannot be a replacement from protection. You cannot experience love if you're only doing it for your safety. Another theme within the story or this novel is identity. You have to be able to understand your worth and your identity, who you are, instead of just relying on society, because society changes, as we can see with her grandmother and the society that they are put in now within the story. Her grandmother had to experience how to survive because she was living with very harsh conditions. And Janie, she's supposed to learn and understand her self-worth or identity and who she is, instead of relying on society, because society is telling her all this stuff like, oh, you should do this, oh, you should be this, and that's not what will give her the answer to who she truly is. Two major symbols inside of this story would be the peach tree and the hurricane. The peach tree was mentioned in the beginning of the novel, where Janie just is introduced to love. The peach tree resembles purity and technically just love, where it expresses how the flower blossoms, how the flowers bloom, and how it looks to Janie within her eyes. She's able to describe it as very lovely, nice, and sensual. For the hurricane, there was a quote or a phrase said during that incident: "Their eyes were watching God," which is the title of the book. This is symbolism because it talks about how it expresses how humans are not able to overcome or overpower nature, especially natural disasters. What the author is trying to say with this hurricane is that you cannot surpass fate, I think. When Janie's grandmother was telling Janie about how she should marry for security instead of love, I think to me that was foreshadowing that Janie's discovery or journey with love will be difficult. It won't be an easy way through where she'll immediately find love and immediately understand that marriage should be for love instead of security. I was able to predict that she would get into relationships that would like hurt her or she would struggle with. For the ending of this novel, I think it was justified because Janie was able to understand herself as well as let go of the reliance on men. Throughout the story, she's constantly relying on a partner. I would recommend this book to people who are probably struggling in relationships. I think I was able to learn a thing or two about this book, especially in terms of relationships, like who I should find or who I should look forward to instead of who I shouldn't.